start a new feature. Not sure what it's called yet. For it will only be for paid subscribers, and it will be. I will basically kind of take something from the book randomly and spend a little time, 20 minutes or so, with paid subscribers who want to join in, and I'll offer some thoughts on a piece of history since 1974, which is what I teach at Princeton, and what this book is about. And then I can take questions. So we'll kind of take a deep dive into one story, one person, one event. I think that might be a lot of fun. And I'll announce this to all the subscribers soon. I'll probably just test it out and send out links until I get exactly how I'd like to do that. But I just want to announce I'm really excited about doing that. A lot of you have been asking for something like that, and we'll probably just focus on one story, one issue, and discuss it. And again, like office hours, happy to take questions. So look for that, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Enjoy it. Deborah asked about the news that's come out last night. Looks like Senate Democrats are moving toward a deal to reopen the government. I think there's a lot of frustration. I should emphasize it's not Senate Democrats; it's a coalition of Senate Democrats that uh, basically conceded at this point. I think that is the way many people are interpreting it. And I think the two sources of frustration, one, by all accounts, including the elections last week, Democrats were in pretty good position at this point in terms of public opinion, in terms of focusing on an issue with the ACA credits to subsidize the cost that had a lot of popular opinion. And Republicans were under a lot of pressure, and they have their eye on the clock, obviously, with SNAP benefits as well as travel going into Thanksgiving. But a coalition, I believe, of 8 Democrats has agreed to move forward with a deal that protects some, gets a little increase in certain benefits, I think including SNAP from what I'm reading. It will get the back pay to furloughed worker and at some workers, and at some point, it will lead to a vote on the ACA, which is not even close to what they were asking for. Why did they do it? I have no way to read their mind. I think part of it was they are kind of learning they're dealing with an administration, and this has been hard from the start, that is fine allowing this to continue for some time. And President Trump seemed to be doubling down on a lot of this in terms of negotiating with the Democrats. They are dealing with leadership in the Republican Party that in the House literally wasn't in Washington. The president was not conducting negotiations. So I think, and again, I'm reading from what all of you are looking, despite being in a better position than many expected, certainly compared to opposition parties in the past that have been involved in shutdown since the mid 1990s to do this. And I do think there's probably a calculation that politically, it would be better at this point to not save the Republicans from what's about to happen with the health care, which they are not willing to deal with in terms of the spike in prices that is going to go on. So those are the calculations. I think there's going to be a lot of upset about this. I think in terms of perception of the party, Democrats had worked so hard to position themselves via the shutdown as a party that fights, to kind of recapture some of the spirit of 218. If you just read the headlines coming out today, certainly not how it's being presented. And we will see. Obviously, this still has to get through the House. The president has to sign it. Deborah, you are absolutely right. And that is part of the kind of universe in which elected officials are dealing with. It is the law that the furlough workers should get their pay. And often a lot of these negotiations are becoming not just the government shutdown, negotiating. Democrats are negotiating over things that are in the law that should not be negotiable. But you have an administration that is willing to either challenge that or directly subvert it. Look, we talked about last week how this entire shutdown, despite being focused on the healthcare, I think really what's driving it is a very clear realization from the administration that from the Democrats. Sorry, again, as I write questions down, sometimes my head flips. And Annie, thank you for that. Um, is a fear that they are not dealing in good faith, that they will make agreements and President Trump will either use executive power to overcome spending agreements that have been made. He will send a rescissions package back to a Republican Congress that will pass cutting whatever is agreed to. And so they're kind of dealing in this really unstable landscape. I think often the shutdown politics is described circa 1995, 96, or 2018. But that's not the world that they are living in right now. So anyway, we will see how it plays out. I think Annie, your point on last Tuesday is also one many Democrats are talking about and feeling that this shutdown wasn't actually just about policy, meaning certainly the healthcare benefits matter, and many Democrats are upset. They were also upset, I think, most. I'm not someone who's always cynical to see government workers, out of paychecks, and to see the effects that were coming and already underway with the government cuts. But it was also about posturing. It was about sending a message to the administration on this bigger issue about violating the Constitution, undercutting kind of constitutional processes. And the idea was that the government shutdown was really one moment when Democrats could demonstrate that they were willing to challenge executive authority in this way with the limited tools that congressional Democrats have at their disposal. So that was really very important. And it wasn't simply about the ACA benefits or the spending package. This is about what's coming next. And secondly, I think there are people off year elections are always difficult to kind of gauge what exactly they mean. But I do think that there were many Democrats who saw very positive results last Tuesday from Democrats of very different kind of perspectives. The mayor in New York, the mayor elect in New York, to the governor elects of both Virginia and New Jersey, who were much more centrist overall, but they had two things in common. One is they focused on affordability and cost of living, and they did it with laser like focus. And second, they were just taking on the president, meaning they were conveying the kind of political fighting spirit that seemed to have been lacking. It's not it's symbolic. This all took place the week that Nancy Pelosi, Congresswoman Pelosi, announced that she would finally retire from Congress. She embodied that Democratic kind of attitude. She certainly did during the first administration. As I talk about in my newsletter, she did this under George W. Bush when he was president. And I think on Tuesday, a lot of the candidates, as well as Governor Newsom in California with the redistricting, postured themselves that way. And I do think it was part of what drew the vote, meaning voters were not voting just because Democrats were fighting. They're voting because they're upset with the White House. They're voting because they're upset with the Republicans. They're voting with the state of democracy, with the state of the country. But they were also voting for candidates, and the turnout reflected this, who are doing something within what they can do. And so I think, we will see. I mean, look, we've talked a lot about now we are in this attention getting political environment where it's very hard to command attention on anything for very long. This was one of the challenges with the shutdown because people moved on. It might very well be the political ramifications for this ultimately are not so big because people will move on. But I do think certainly, put aside how it plays out, there is a sense of disappointment that some Democrats are feeling, and Democrats will have to figure out how to deal with this, how to package this moment, because they don't want to lose the very real momentum that emerged from last Tuesday's off year election. And secondly, they're going to have to figure out not just how their voters, like some in the comments are saying, feel about them. They now have a president who has tested them. This is how President Trump, I believe, works, and saw through that test that there are limits to how far they will go. And for him, when he senses that, he tries to take advantage and capitalize on that kind of fear or that kind of limitation. So we will see, but I think all those comments are very helpful. Again, please send in your questions on all the issues of the moment. I'm happy to tackle. Someone a little earlier asked about the Supreme Court news that we saw coming out today. I think there will be a lot of relief. And I just saw the initial stories since I was doing some work. So maybe more detail has come out. The first is that SCOTUS has not declined to accept the same sex marriage challenge. And I think there's some relief that they didn't. There was fear if they took up the challenge, it would already signal that they were pretty serious about overturning it. This has been a fear since Dobbs, that same sex marriage would be the next major constitutional issue on the docket. At least for now, it appears that at least with this case, which was brought by a clerk who's been around for a while now, involved in this politics, who did not want to perform same-sex marriages, that the court is not taking that up. So I'm sure there will be relief in many quarters about this. Another thing that before I turn this on, so again, the limits of the detail are immense. I just saw the initial news discussion that the court has agreed to take up a challenge to mail in ballots in Mississippi. People should keep their eye on this. This is going to be a very, very consequential decision, and it could have ramifications for the midterm elections. Mail in ballots have become a really important mechanism for voting in the last, certainly since COVID in 2020, but even more broadly. I mean, initially, the idea, certainly in 2020, was that mail in ballots tended to favor Democratic voters. I've seen some studies that show it's not as clear, but I do think it is clear to me that this effort to curtail types of voting as well as access of voting through IDs combined are part of a campaign that's been going on really since the 2010s in its modern incarnation to restrict voting rights. And it has been a Republican project, not a bipartisan project. And mail in ballots have been a target, certainly, of the administration, who we hear often. So we will see what the court does. I don't know. I think is genuine concern that the court might make it harder for that kind of voting to take place. I've heard from a lot of people involved in Democratic politics, they're really working for the midterms and seeking to kind of try to encourage early in-person voting, because there's nerves about what's going to happen with these. So we will see, but I think this is actually quite significant. As I've said over and over, the midterms are, hugely, um, um, hugely consequential. And okay, DB's talking about the 5-day grace period. Well, I'll read the details. Thank you, and send in more that you know. But I do want to know more, and I will learn about that in the next few hours, because historically, even in an age of cynicism, the balance of power really matters. And for all the limitations people might feel about Democrats, back to our earlier discussion, should Democrats be able to obtain control of the House, which historically is the odds of what will happen. And Thank you for that, Kat. I will talk to that in a second. Historically, that is what happens. These midterms are backlashes. There's only a few exceptions, like 1934 and 2002. And Given President Trump's unpopularity, and what we saw in the midterms is when President Trump is decoupled from the MAGA Republican, the MAGA Republican is not strong politically. And so you would expect in a clean election that House Democrats and an election with narrow majorities are looking very realistically at the possibility of retaining control. And that can change just the dynamics of politics. We saw this in 2011 after Republicans took control of the House and really checked Obama. We saw this 2007. We saw with Democrats really reversing a lot of what President Bush was trying to do. We saw more recently in 2009, which not ironically, but it's where Sheryl Spansberg kind of came of age after the midterms in 2018. So I think there's a natural question: do the numbers play out as people think? But there's this whole other layer we're dealing with in this midterm that we have not seen at this level, where will the elections be clean? Not will they take place. I hear that all the time. I think they will. But I do think there's going to be challenges. There's going to be challenges to ballots, to counting. There's going to be challenges to ID. And this will be part of the battlefield. This midterm is going to be as much legal as it will political. And I think that is where certainly both Democrats and just bipartisan advocates of democracy who believe in the right to vote, in the sanctity of the vote, will have to be preparing from now to then, and then be on the ground to kind of rebuff, as we saw in 2020, every effort to subvert the results. Kat, you're absolutely right. I mean, elections in the United States have been primarily a issue that the states have handled. Conservatives have generally been the one who have stated that over and over, in part because there have been expansions of federal authority, primarily around efforts to combat racism and racial discrimination, which have been part of our politics, sadly and tragically, since the end of Reconstruction. And the major federal extensions really revolved around the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which were efforts to commit the government to protecting the 15th Amendment. And We've seen that also with redistricting. And then we've seen it with the one man, one vote cases between 1962 and 64. Not a lot of people know about these, which really it was a series of cases where the court said each vote had to count the same, meaning until the 1960s, one of the things you saw not only in southern states, but in many Midwestern states was large, sparsely populated rural areas had the same number of representatives as very concentrated urban areas, which tended to be more diverse, more liberal. And it was a way to dilute the power of people living in the cities. And these court decisions did kind of did they were part of the government that time via the court, saying you can't do anything in the states, and ultimately culminated in 65. But other than that, that's been the principal way. After 2000, you saw more federal intervention in trying to update ballot machines, trying to make sure that everyone had equal access to equally good machines. But what we've seen under President Trump is a very broad assertion of federal power in elections that just goes against how the constitutional system is set up, and an erosion of the states' rights and the state control over elections, which was very foundational in the Constitution. So, and I think just to add kind of one more element to that, I do think, as we're seeing with vaccines, as we were seeing with SNAP, there's just going to be, we're seeing with redistricting, more activities via the states to protect against the federal government. I think this, especially after what just happened in the shutdown, the states will be the battlefield where Democrats are going to try to fight this fight via governors, via mayors, local officials. And I do think voting in 2026 will be one of the places where it's a battle of protection to make sure these elections happen fairly and every vote counts. I want to pause and thank everyone for joining. And thank you, subscribers. And as always, I hope that some of you will consider a paid subscription, which supports all the work that I'm trying to do, the interviews, the newsletters, and more. And for those of you who missed it earlier, I just said we have a new edition. We put out Kevin Cruz and I of Fault Lines. But one of the new features I'm going to introduce, and I'm just going to test it out, I'm telling you all first, a new feature for paid subscribers where I'll send out the link and I'll literally randomly pick something in the book as we meet. And this is about a history from 1974 today, from Nixon's resignation today. And we'll like spend a little time just on that. I'll offer a few, 2 or 3 thoughts on the significance, as I do to my students at Princeton, and then I'll take questions about it. So I'm excited, and I'm excited to offer that to the paid subscribers, and maybe it's an incentive for joining or even sending it as a gift to someone if you're enjoying the long view. Anyway, so I'm excited about that. I don't know what I'll call it. Suggestions are good, but I do want to recapture a little bit, as I do with Office Hours, the classroom, which I love so much, and bring it to some of you who are here with me in this new learning and reading environment. The kind of I'll just I guess I'll tackle. Do I use fault lines, Lynn? I don't. I tend to use my own books in my courses. That's a good question. Occasionally, I use a few articles. I mean, part of what I do as a historian, which is a little different than some, I take my research and my teaching right up to the current times, which a lot of historians don't do. So sometimes I have some articles I've written or chapters in books because there's not anything on it yet. I'm kind of one of the first doing that period. So that's the only time I try to, like, I teaching about President Biden and the Biden presidency. And so I edited a book on that. And so some of that work will inform what I teach. That book's coming out in April, or same with Obama or President Trump. So, and then my big lecture at Princeton, I know this is off the news topics, but it is, I teach a lecture course on the U.S. since 1974, which is one of my favorites. It's very different than the book. The book came out of an earlier version of the class many, many years ago, but I tend, as you might suspect, I like to change things all the time. So my lectures have really transformed over the years, and I try to update them and think about things in new ways. But I'm really excited to have this, and I hope it's an incentive for paid subscribers to kind of do a little classroom work in a fun way. I'll keep them short and snappy, and we'll just do one issue each time. But take a look for that. Final question was earlier on the elections, and we've talked a little bit about it. Look, I think two things are true at once. I do think off-year elections, it's dangerous to make too much of a claim in terms of what it means, not only for midterms, but for presidential elections. Just a long history of off years not matching what happens next. And we have to remember that's not a blue state, red state. It's a moment in time. That said, look, I wrote my last newsletter. I think I wrote an extra one or whatever. So there was a lot going on last week, but I think there's things Democrats can take from this without taking this as inevitably kind of a sign that the Democrats are in good position for 2026. I think it's very clear that focusing on affordability and cost of living is a very powerful issue for Democrats. Historically, it's always been a powerful issue. And I think some Democrats talk themselves into believing that they can't do that. And what is striking to me, again, from Mayor elect Mamdani in New York to the governors, both of Virginia and New Jersey, is that was the issue, whether it was rent freezes or utilities in New Jersey. This was the question. And that's, I think, an issue moving forward that can unite factions of the Democratic Party and that can really challenge Republicans. Secondly, I think it's very notable that the Republicans, like I said earlier, decoupled from President Trump, are extraordinarily vulnerable, and that bears out in the polls. That bears out in some of the swings back we're seeing in specific constituencies. And third, I think a lesson a lot of people like which kind of Democrat should run in 2026. I think it's the wrong way to think about it. I thought the off years, if you're watching as a kind of analysts, reflect something that's always been true of Democrats. They tend to be a very coalitional party, and the focus should be on which candidates work in specific areas, and that should be the heart of candidate recruitment rather than nationalizing the preference. So you run someone very different in a very liberal city like New York than you would in a statewide like Virginia, et cetera, et cetera. And there's many more lessons from it, but those are three that really stood out. And we will see what comes next. Anyway, thank you for joining Office Hours. I'll be back next week, but I'll be back this week with lots of other interesting stuff. And if I have time, I'm going to send out all the paid subscribers. We'll get a little link and I'll test out this new idea. And please join me at the end of the week for Jonathan Cohn and Charlie Sykes and John Alter for Then and Now. Talk to you soon. Be healthy, safe, and keep learning. Bye bye.